Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to outline and give you guys the reasons why I hate the few most hated cards the most. And what I try to accomplish with this video is kind of giving a bit of a hint, a bit of a message to Blizzard because, they do watch, they kind of care what people think. And this is a topic that people don't really talk about. They talk about that they hate playing against Shaman. Oh my god, Zulak, constantly. But when it comes to Blizzard's design of the game, well, they're making one card at a time. So I thought it'd be interesting to give out my opinion on what cards I hate playing against and why, which is a pretty important thing. And, I do encourage you guys to be vocal about this as well, but more than that, I encourage you guys to be honest. I know that, when I make a video giving out my opinion, a lot of the people who watch, a lot of you guys, because you guys are bros, you guys are gonna be, yeah, I stand with Kripp, he's totally right about this. And maybe I am, but maybe I'm not. And, what I think is really, really annoying to play against might not be what you dislike playing against. So that's a pretty important distinction. Alright, so without further ado, what are some things I hate playing against? Now, the first two cards on my list are of the wild format because I largely play Arena and they, quite directly impact the game mode that I play. So the first card that I really hate and would have been on this list had it been in the standard format is the Mad Scientist. Playing against this card in Arena is unbelievably infuriating because Arena is a place where you try to get the most tempo possible in the early game, so even if you have, a pretty mediocre deck, you can possibly outpace your opponent. Well, if your opponent has a Mad Scientist and is playing a mage and actually has a secret that's drawn from the deck, your chances of outpacing your opponent is right around 0. So it just seems a bit unfair. I play a lot of mage in Arena as well. I've drafted a lot of Mad Scientists. It's a pretty okay card because most of the time when I draft it, I don't even get a secret after I pick the card. But sometimes people are very lucky, and if they get high luck draft and a high luck draw, they instantaneously win the game based off of this one card. Just so you guys understand how insane it is. In terms of tempo, it's 5 mana, but in terms of overall card value, it's like 6 mana. So if you play a Mad Scientist as a mage, you're playing a 3 mana secret from your deck. So you're drawing the card as well. The card draw is kind of worth about 1 mana, and the secret is obviously worth 3 because that's how much it costs, and you're not spending that cost when it's part of the death rattle. And in the early stages of the game, a 2/2/2 drop is often as good as a 3/2 or a 2/3/2 drop, especially as a mage, which can kind of, mess around with the stat variables in that stage. So basically, it's a 6 mana card that you play on turn 2 in a world that's almost entirely dependent on tempo and slightly on value. So you can imagine Mad Scientist is absolutely ridiculous, and I really hope they never make more cards like this because not only are they ridiculously infuriating to play against, they also break down what type and how powerful secrets Blizzard can introduce to the game. And, as Mad Scientist stayed in the current meta, obviously, very few decent secrets got implemented. The other card I hate playing against is Muster for Battle. It's more of a thing because Paladins are so polarized. Paladins with weapons and a few very key powerful cards do ridiculously well, and if you don't have any of those, Paladins in Arena are garbage. And Muster for Battle is the ultimate one for that. You get Muster for Battle 1 in like 10 Paladin drafts, and to actually have it on turn 3 is super unlikely, but when you're playing against the Paladin, again, you're trying to outpace them best you can in the early game, and if they have Muster for Battle, the chance that you beat them is, again, very close to 0. So it's, again, one of those cards that is very polarizing if you have it versus if you don't, and I just hate playing against that kind of stuff because, even if I do overcome that situation, it's like, oh my god, I got a sick 1-drop, I got a sick 2-drop, and then he coins Muster for Battle, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm still going to lose, So that feeling is terrible for me. Now, the rest of the cards on the list largely affect constructed play, but because constructed follows the zoo format and arena follows the Zoo/Tempo format, they definitely affect both almost equally. So the first card on my list is Power Overwhelming, and this card has been in the game for a long time. It hasn't been too complained about, but I think it is time. I think it is time we complain about Power Overwhelming. The reason I think that is because Power Overwhelming was once a card that, you have to sacrifice a creature, and, you play the card to actually get the 4 damage value out of it. But basically that aspect of sacrificing a creature has become so much less of a cost now that we've had a lot of the expansions that we've played through. It's ridiculously easy to get a 1/1 token on the board compared to the original state of the game. The original state of the game, Power Overwhelming was really good, but I wouldn't call it broken. But these days, you have so many cards that just produce tokens for free. You have cards that have to be killed 2 or 3 times sometimes until you actually fully remove it off the board, that Power Overwhelming in almost every game that I play literally acts as deal 4 damage for 1 mana. And do you know who would love a card like that? Every class. So that's why I think it's quite a bit unbalanced. I think if Power Overwhelming was +3/+3, it'd still be really good and played in the exact same decks. So, in that situation, you have to think there's something a bit wrong here. Next card on my list is Abusive Sergeant. I think Abusive Sergeant is, again, one of these cards that was once pretty balanced, but now the cost of having some sort of garbage on the board that is not really normally relevant, but because your whole deck is comprised of ridiculously powerful buffs, Abusive Sergeant is suddenly completely insane. So you get, part of the effect as you do with just a regular buff, but it's also a 2/1 1-drop, and 1-drops have like the highest stat per mana, so you're getting the most tempo if you have a lot of 1-drops. So basically, you by playing a zoo deck, you play a bunch of 1-drops and 2-drops that are really powerful, that buff each other and trade well. And that playstyle is really frustrating to play against, just because it's just so effective these days. And I feel there's so much RNG involved in the early game that I'm not actually really playing the game when I'm winning or losing versus these type of decks. So I think Abusive Sergeant is one of the big offenders, as it is in almost every single degenerate zoo deck these days, that I think this card needs to be looked at a little bit. And then we have Flamewaker. Now, Flamewaker I've described as the Tavern Brawl Ruiner. It's also just a card that, again, is very frustrating to play against. It is so powerful. The spell synergistic mage has so many tools already, and adding the Flamewaker that just does constant damage makes it such a big problem. I think I would be okay with the Flamewaker if it wasn't so hard to kill. If Flamewaker stats were more aggressive rather than defensive, making it easier to remove when you're playing as a control deck. Like if Flamewaker had 3 health, it could have more attack. I think that would balance the card out a lot. If it had 2 health, I would be really happy if Flamewaker had 2 health. But the 4 health makes it very hard to get rid of, and while it does counter a lot of these zoo decks that, a lot of people hate playing against, it's not like people love playing against Tempo Mage, so yeah, I do think the card definitely deserves to be on my most hated list. Then I have Flame Juggler. I think Flame Juggler, while by design it looks like a pretty innocent enough card, I think it is one of the worst cards implemented into the game, because it's a must-have in this world of constant zoo crap, and the chance for the Flame Juggler to kill versus not kill your opponent's 1-drop that has 1 health literally decides the game, I think is just absurdly stupid, So I'm going to play a deck full of low drops that buff each other. You're going to play a deck full of low drops that buff each other. You're going to play your first low drop so you can buff it next turn, and I'm going to play a Flame Juggler, and if I kill the minion that you want to keep but sometimes won't because the Flame Juggler might kill it, based on the outcome of that 50-50 RNG, one of us will win. Well, are we really playing a strategy-based card game? That's all I'm saying. And then I have Tunnel Trog on my list. I think this idea of, let's make a 1-drop that is a 1/3 stat line that gets buffed based on synergies and cards you would already include in that type of deck, we don't need more of those. Please, Blizzard, please. I know there's a few in the game that are about as good as Tunnel Trog. Please no more. All right. Tunnel Trog is one of those cards that is so ridiculous. Again, you need to have removal for it if you're playing a control deck, and if you remove that, you might not have enough to remove the next thing, so it gets out of control immediately. It's just a card that is extremely frustrating to deal with, extremely unfair when your opponent gets, an early Tunnel Trog and has a ton of overload and taunts and all. You guys know what I'm talking about. You guys have played this game. I really hate the new Flame Wreathed Faceless card. Now, I was a bit torn to put this on the list. I think the reason this card is good is because all the other stuff that I mentioned exists. But because it exists, Shaman's having a 4-mana 7/7 while synergizing with all the rest while they can drop the negative effect on the card. Yeah, that feels a little bit unfair. And in Arena, it definitely feels very unfair. While, Shamans definitely need very powerful cards, I think this is a little bit too much. In Arena, Shamans are, again, extremely polarized because of these few new additions. Yes, if you have a 4-mana 7/7 and another one and then another one, you're going to win the game. If you don't, you better hope you have weapons. And if you don't have weapons, well, I guess you're not going to win the game. So, Blizzard's trying to balance things out in all these different modes the best they can. I understand that. But I really think that changing some of the older cards and how they work, particularly useless ones, to kind of even the playing field for these classes, rather than introducing cards that are blatantly way off the power curve, is probably the better way to do it. We don't need to fix a bad class. We don't need to give them, 3 of the most absurdly broken cards the game has ever seen. No, we don't need to do that. We can just give them a few good cards, and maybe we can buff some of their bad cards to put them on even leveling field so that, you can have more diverse constructed decks, and when you play against the class in Arena, it's not absurdly polarized. Crazy idea, right? Now, one of the cards that I thought should have been nerfed, by the way, in the standard wild division of the ranked format was Doomhammer. I talked about Doomhammer a little bit because it's a very interesting card. Because it is a weapon, it's very hard to have a weapon that is truly broken. The reason is, if a weapon is really broken, then everybody will play weapon removal, and then the weapon is no longer that broken. And, to a large degree, that is actually still true. Okay, Doomhammer, I think, struggles to be on my 10 most hated cards list, but it definitely needs to be there. And the reason it needs to be there is, yes, it's a weapon. It's one of the most broken weapons in the game. It generally only belongs in extremely aggressive decks, which I think, again, personally, I do not find that much fun to play against. But the main reason why I hate it is because all the other decks, and particularly the Shaman deck that has Doomhammer in the deck already, force you to be so defensive if you're trying to play a control deck that if you have, let's just say there's a lot of Shamans out there, there's a lot of Doomhammers out there, you keep losing to Doomhammers, you put in weapon removal in your deck, then when you're playing, against Shamans, you're going to feel pretty good when you can, destroy their Doomhammer. But because you have weapon removal in your deck, that drastically affects your matchup against the other Zoo decks that don't have weapons. And then you kind of, lose against those because of exactly that. So you're just kind of in a situation where the card is so broken you have to counter it. If you counter it, you automatically get countered by something else. So it's just like, we used to have this game where certain combo decks beat aggro decks, most aggro decks beat control decks, but now it's like, there's this one Zoo deck that's super powerful, this other Zoo deck that's super powerful counters that, and then this other tempo Zoo deck counters that one, and then it's a circle of just Zoo and aggro decks that counter each other. So it's not really fun, in my mind. The last card on the list is one that has been pushing away control decks since the beginning of time, and now I think is more relevant than ever because you can't even have that many big drops. So when you're looking at your hand, you used all your early game answers, all your tools as a control deck. You have that one card that you need to just start winning the game off of, but you can't play it because rogues have sap, and you would instantly lose the game if your 7 or 8 drop got sapped. Well, I just really hate sap because of that. Sap is one of those things that really keeps control decks at bay, which I think in the original state of the game was a good idea because there was a lot of very powerful control decks at that time. But nowadays, control decks are basically hanging on a thread for survival, so that even if you try to play one, you might get up against the rogue, get sapped, get mad, and then you are no longer playing a control deck. So I do think it's one of those cards that kind of needs to be looked at once again. Maybe it should be, twisted a little bit so it's more effective against smaller minions and less effective against big minions. I don't know how they do that, but you kind of get the idea what I'd like to see. So let me know what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoyed my review, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.